Pierce Brosnan remains one of the most famous spies in the world. That's a joke, of course, but we do love him for reviving the classic 007 James Bond movie series, thanks to his breathtaking portrayal of the brilliant, classy spy. And just like the enigmatic Bond character, Pierce's real life has aspects of it that would completely shock you and many of his fans into oblivion. Let's take a look at what untold truths lie hidden in the shadows of the actor's spotlight. Starting from his traumatic childhood, many fans don't know that Pierce was the son of a carpenter. Unfortunately, his carpenter father abandoned him and his mother when he was just a baby, and as if that wasn't enough trauma, Pierce's mother decided to leave him too. She moved to London to become a nurse when Pierce was just 4 years old, so he was left with his grandparents. This too would soon turn into a terrible nightmare, as Pierce lost both grandparents. Surprisingly, this didn't cause his mother or father to return and take him with them. So following the grandparents' passing, he had to stay with an aunt and then an uncle until he moved to a boarding home. In his own words, "I was sent to live with a woman named Eileen, who had a place in a poor part of town. She had her own children and she also had lodgers. She agreed to take me in, and I moved upstairs with the lodgers, all grown men with jobs. One worked in the mill, one worked in a local bank." Pierce goes on to describe his living conditions in great detail. And then there was another bed for whoever came in visiting. There was this long room, and there were these iron beds with old mattresses on them. This is where the 3 lodgers were. At the very end of the room there was my little bed, with a curtain around it with newspapers pinned on it, so the light wouldn't shine in when the guys came home. At this point, he described his childhood as fairly solitary, and you probably agree with this, given the absence of both of his parents. He commented about it once, saying, "It sounds pretty bleak, all of this, but that's what it was. No wonder I'm an actor. But you learn to be happy within all of that. You learn how to create your own happiness. And you learn to forgive. You learn to rise above it. And you learn to view people with a different kind of clarity, because they've hurt you, and because there was no one there for you to go to. There was not this symbol, the father figure, or the mother. So you learn to find your own independence and survive. If you didn't know, you acted as if you did know." By stating that his father was unknown to him, Pierce believed that his father's absence didn't only affect him as a child, but his mother too. According to the actor, to be Irish Catholic in the 1950s and have a marriage which was absent, a father who was absent, the mother and the wife suffered greatly, so he didn't blame her for leaving. He added, "Leaving when I was a baby. Mom was a brave woman. She made the audacious decision to leave and work as a nurse in England, essentially hoping for a better life for me and her. Once or twice a year, my mother would visit. That better life eventually came 6 years after his mom left him. By the time Pierce was entering his teenage years, his mom had gotten married to her new husband, William Carmichael, and moved into his Long Nidri residence in Scotland. She then brought Pierce to visit her, making him leave Ireland for the very first time in his young life. Around this time, Pierce would come across the name James Bond for the first time, thanks to his stepfather, Carmichael, who took him to see the Bond movie Goldfinger. Pierce stated, "In Ireland, I had been brought up on a diet of old Mother Riley and Norman Wisdom movies, which would not translate to readers in America, but they're black and white comedies made here. In the summer of '64, my mother and Bill, my stepfather, took me to the movies, and I saw Goldfinger." Now listen to how he felt watching the movie. "And here I sat in this cinema on Putney High Street with this spectacle, this magical event taking place before my eyes, called James Bond. The music, the women, the shimmering silhouettes of nakedness, and this wonderful woman lying on the bed. 3-4 weeks before, I had been in Ireland, in a tiny town, and here I was in the great metropolis, London. Now, maybe the seed was sown there, I don't know, but I thought James Bond was very cool. Clearly, the movie captured the young boy's soul, and it was a great experience for the young boy, who had no idea what the future held for him." Pierce's mom and stepdad decided to move the family from Scotland to London and helped him start school there. But it wasn't all rosy. Young Pierce was getting bullied in his new school. Some people in his school didn't even bother to know his name, simply calling him Irish. He even commented, "The British have a great way of making you feel that way, and I experienced a profound sense of alienation." At the age of 16, Pierce chose to become a painter after dropping out of school. So he enrolled at St. Martin's School of Art in London to study commercial illustration. However, a chance meeting would eventually change his career choice. and you almost wouldn't believe your ears. While attending a rehearsal for a workshop at the Oval House, Pierce came across a fire eater teaching people how to eat fire, and for some reason, he decided to stop and learn. Why? Hear his reasoning. There was a big group of people in there, but I noticed that there were women and they had their tops off, so I thought I'd join in. This guy was a street performer, and he was teaching us how to put the flames across the chest, and the young ladies had to take their bras off. There were no bras then anyway. So I went to the workshop and I learned how to fire eat. A pretty neat reason to become a fire eater, right? But our beloved actor stuck with it to the end and became a professional fire eater, an ability that is still listed in his CV. The business of fire eating apparently lit the flame of passion within him. Unknown to him, his journeying into acting was beginning to take shape. As a trainee commercial artist working at a little studio in Putney, South London, he was talking to a colleague in the photographic department, and they were talking about movies. Pierce had fallen in love with movies a long time ago, but he had no real dreams of being an actor. This colleague he was talking to, however, belonged to a theater company, and he invited Pierce to join. After thinking about it for a while and simply having nothing else to occupy his time, he decided to take his coworker's offer and went down to the company one evening. He said about being there for the first time, "I was petrified. I had been asked to be in school plays, but always declined. I thought they were I just had no desire to be in plays. But here I found myself in this workshop, a rather dark studio, with about 30 other people doing voice and movement exercises which were completely alien to me, but so exhilarating. There was no censorship or shame allotted to one, and you could be anything you wanted to be." From that first day, he began to show up twice a week. He then switched it to 3 times a week. Soon enough, he began going there every night after work. Eventually, Pierce was so happy with the theater that he gave up the job in commercial art and joined some people to form a theater company called the Oval House Theater Company. According to him, he was the youngest member, working with people who were actors, teachers, musicians, and writers. As a struggling young man who had been on his own for a long time, he chose to work as a waiter. During the day, he cleaned houses and worked in a bottling factory just to supplement his income. These were the available jobs he could do, whether in the morning or the late evening. It didn't matter to him. He had decided to pursue acting, and nothing was going to stop him. He said concerning this decision, "I went to the drama center in Chalk Farm after I decided that I wanted to be an actor, and the Oval House had inspired me and filled me with a passion and a want. I had no education, and I wasn't blessed in the theater and the world of literature. At that point, I was just a great exhibitionist in street theater." He spent the next 3 years taking acting instruction at the drama center. After school, the young graduate couldn't get an acting gig immediately, so he began working as an acting assistant stage manager at the York Theatre Royal. But it wasn't long before his acting debut came calling. His first film was The Long Good Friday, where he acted as an IRA terrorist. Not that Pierce was interested in wasting any time when it came to his career, because within 6 months, he was selected by the playwright Tennessee Williams to play the role of McCabe in the British premiere of The Red Devil Battery Sign. Pierce's performance was so good that Williams sent a telegram to him stating only, "Thank God for you, my dear boy." Pierce had taken London by storm with just his second film. Yet he was still getting brief appearances in films. However, as his fame grew, he got some television performances under his belt. He quickly became a rising television star in the U.S. when he got the leading role in the popular miniseries Manions of America. That success got him another role in BBC's 9-part miniseries Nancy Astor. His contribution to this miniseries later earned him a Golden Globe Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. But before the awards came pouring in, Pierce still had his work cut out for him. Lucky for him, he had his wife to help him, Cassandra Harris. He met the Australian actress through David Harris, the nephew of Richard Harris, shortly after leaving drama school. Cassandra herself was already a divorcee with 2 children from her prior marriage, Charlotte and Chris. Pierce was so enthralled by her that upon meeting her he said, "What a beautiful-looking woman." He later added, "I didn't think of wooing her, or attempting to woo her. I just wanted to enjoy her beauty and who she was." The couple eventually began dating and bought a house together in Wimbledon after they got married. Pierce adopted his new wife's kids, and it wasn't long before the family welcomed Sean, Cassandra, and Pierce's child together. Now a father, Pierce soon realized how incredibly prepared the U.S. was to receive him. so he decided to move to Southern California with his wife. The couple chose to take their chance on making it big in Hollywood, even borrowing money from the bank to ease their relocation. On getting to the U.S., Pierce spent the next 2 weeks going on auditions. Fortunately for him and his family, it was the very first audition he did that clicked. He had gotten picked as the lead role in the NBC romantic comedy detective series Remington Steele. Doing the series changed the financial situation of Pierce's family. He and Cassandra had been struggling for a while, but immediately after he landed this gig, the money problems were taken care of. Additionally, during this Remington Steele years, the show made a brief visit to Ireland, and Pierce had an unexpected visitor. Tom Brosnan, the father he had never known, suddenly showed up. Pierce related what happened. Our trip to Ireland generated a lot of press, and I suspected my father might surface. And he did. One Sunday afternoon he came to the hotel. He came up from Kerry with many first cousins I never knew. There came a knock on the door, and you knew that when you opened the door, the man you're going to see is your father. I opened the door, and there was Tom. I expected to see a very tall man. He was a man of medium stature, pushed-back silver hair, flinty eyes, and a twizzled jaw. He had a very strong Kerry accent, and Tom and I sat and had afternoon tea with all those cousins in the room. Pierce met his father after 3 decades, and he said he felt they were strangers when they met. And in all fairness, what else would they have been? He added that he regretted that they even had to meet under such circumstances. He said, "I wish I had met him in a pub or somewhere on his own terms. I would have loved to have sat with him alone and just talked. There are parts of my character, I just don't know where they come from." To him, his father just didn't feel like family anymore. Pierce's thoughts were all over the place, and he later talked about what he was thinking as he sat across from his father. Of course, the burning question beneath the course of the conversation was, why did you leave? But how do you cut to such a question after such a long absence? I was 33 at the time. I had been angry with him, and I was angry after the meeting, because I didn't ask him the questions. There was enough pain already. Nothing much was said about his father after that meeting. Pierce simply returned to work. It was this same year that the Washington Post pointed out that he could make it as a young James Bond, the piece of his past he had long forgotten. The mention of Bond was reignited again when his wife got cast as Countess Liesl von Schlaff in the movie For Your Eyes Only. Pierce had followed her to set, and producer Albert R. Broccoli, who was the man in charge of James Bond films at the time. Cassandra introduced her husband to Broccoli as the man to replace the present Bond actor Roger Moore when Roger decided to retire. Broccoli ended up saying, "If he can act, he's my guy." After having dinner at Broccoli's home, Pierce and his wife drove back to their lodgings in a rented beater car. Pierce later recalled that while driving back, he jokingly said the famous line, "The name is Bond, James Bond." You would expect that with such coincidences, Pierce would be shooting a Bond movie the very next day. But as Cassandra went to work, the Bond issue became more of a running joke between husband and wife. Pierce stated, "I would do my own impersonations of James Bond, just for fun, just driving her home from work or going out or talking about her experience on it. But even so, it was not an ambition to play James Bond. I had my sights set on other aspects of the work." It was over a decade before Pierce's name would be seriously mentioned in the same room as the character James Bond. In 1991, a terrible tragedy befell him, and Pierce was thrown back into the traumatic childhood he had tried so hard to escape. He and his wife had gone to India, where he was to play the lead in The Deceivers, a Merchant Ivory production. During the shoot in India, in the baking heat of Rajasthan, his wife began to feel really tired and run down. He stated, "She got very fatigued, very worn out, and we weren't sure what it was. She had had pain, slight pains, and in a checkup 6 months before, the doctor had said, 'It's all right, don't worry.' If only he had looked closely. When we finished in India, we came back to London. She went to the doctor, and he took her into the hospital the very next night. The diagnosis turned out to be full-blown ovarian cancer. Pierce couldn't believe his ears. The one person who had been there for him was now facing the possibility of dying. Cancer changed everything for the family. Pierce stated, "Because you're dealing with death, you're dealing with the possibility of death and dying." And it was that way through the chemotherapy, through the first look operation, the second look, the third look, the fourth look, the fifth look. The couple's struggle against the cancer lasted 4 years. Pierce stated, "Cassie was very positive about life. I mean, she had the most amazing energy and outlook on life. She could read people extremely well. She had, above all, the greatest sense of humor. She had this wonderful laugh, which her children have inherited. Unfortunately, Cassandra died in 1991. Her husband described it as a terrible loss, and the question he kept asking himself was, how do you carry on afterward? He was now the sole parent of 3 children, and he had to raise them all by himself. 4 years after Cassandra's death, the Bond movies came knocking at Pierce's door. Pierce ended up doing 4 installments of the Bond movies. The movies propelled him to the peak of Hollywood stardom. He was so high up there, his late wife would have been so proud. But after the Bond movies, perhaps because of how commercially successful they were, Pierce's subsequent movies weren't equally appreciated by critics. This didn't seem to bother him too much, as he continued to make movies when the opportunity presented itself. Unfortunately, Pierce's contented life was shattered when his adopted daughter Charlotte also died of ovarian cancer in 2013. In the midst of the tragedy, he took comfort in his family. He had remarried, and his wife, American journalist Keely Shea Smith, had given birth to 2 boys, Dylan and Paris. Pierce might not be in blockbuster movies these days, but his impact on the movie industry has been well honored. He was awarded the Irish Film and Television Academy Lifetime Achievement Award for his contribution to Irish film. Queen Elizabeth II also made him an honorary officer of the Order of the British Empire, OBE, for his outstanding contribution to the British film industry. Describing the feeling of becoming an actor and the influence it had on his life, he said, "When I found acting, or when acting found me, it was a liberation. It was a stepping stone into another life, away from a life that I had, and acting was something I was good at, something which was appreciated. That was a great satisfaction in my life." Even now, Pierce continues to provide high-profile support to environmental groups. Because of what his late wife went through, supporting women's health care has become one of his top priorities.